The dust in the auction yard clung to the heat like it had nowhere else to go. Flies hovered around the edges of the crowd, drawn to sweat and the tang of horsehair. Somewhere, a mule kicked against its rope and made the boards rattle. On the platform, she sat on an overturned crate, knees drawn close, the hem of her torn dress hanging loose over bare feet. Her hair stuck to her face in uneven strands, damp from the hours before. In her arms, wrapped in what had once been part of her own skirt, the child stirred weakly, a soft sound lost under the auctioneer's voice. She didn't look at the men in the crowd, the ones who measured her with a glance, the ones who squinted to see the bundle in her arms, the ones who turned away as if the sight of her was too much trouble. She kept her eyes on the dust between her toes. The auctioneer's tone had no weight to it, just the rhythm of a man who had done this too often. Lot 42, one woman, age 19. Condition. He paused, letting his gaze fall to the baby. Recently delivered. The child goes with her. There was a murmur from the men in hats and trail coats. Some shook their heads. One spat into the dirt. "Ain't no good to me if she can't stand without swaying," a voice muttered from the side. The baby shifted, and she pulled the cloth tighter around it, rocking without thought. A thin line of blood, dried and cracked, ran along her calf from where she had stumbled earlier. The air around her felt still, though the yard was full. The auctioneer tried again. "She can work in time. Strong enough once she's had a meal or two. Who'll start the bid?" Silence spread wider than the dust. A few men shuffled their boots. One man in a gray vest cleared his throat but didn't raise a hand. At the back of the yard, near the shade of the livery wall, a tall figure stood with his hat low. His coat was travel-worn, edges dark from weather. He had not moved since the bidding began. Now he stepped forward, boots scuffing against the packed earth. The auctioneer straightened. "Mr. Hale, you bidding?" The man didn't answer right away. He took a silver dollar from his coat and let it turn once in the light before slipping it back into his palm. Then, without raising his voice, he said, $2. A few in the crowd laughed under their breath. $2 for both? Someone said. $2, he repeated. The auctioneer's eyebrows lifted. "Do I hear 3? No one spoke. "Going once." The baby whimpered, and the young woman shifted her grip, shoulders curling to shield it. "Going twice." The tall man took another step, hand resting lightly on the handle of the holstered Colt at his side. His eyes stayed on the woman. "Sold. Lot 42 to Mr. Hale." The sound of it seemed to fade as quickly as it came. The crowd began to break apart, moving on to the next lot. Barrels of flour, harness straps, a lame mule. Hale stepped to the platform. The auctioneer motioned for her to stand. She tried but faltered, catching herself with one hand on the crate. Hale's hand was there, steady, and for a moment she looked up at him. No surprise, no relief. Just the dull clarity of someone too tired to wonder at another's reasons. He placed the coins in the auctioneer's palm without counting them. "Get her down," he said. The auctioneer helped her to the edge of the platform. Hale took her arm, not gripping, just guiding, and led her toward the shade of the livery wall. Her bare feet left faint prints in the dust. The baby lay still against her chest, the cloth bundle shifting with each step. They reached the alley beside the livery, where the noise of the auction dulled behind walls. Hale stopped. "You can rest here," he said quietly. She sank to the ground with her back to the wall, the crate beside her. Hale crouched, took a canteen from his saddlebag, and set it near her knee. She reached for it slowly, as if testing whether the offer was real. He didn't ask her name. He didn't offer his. When she drank, her hands trembled. The baby stirred again, mouth searching. She looked down, adjusted the cloth, and began to feed him, eyes on nothing beyond the small shape in her arms. Hale leaned back against the wall, watching the sunlight shift across the yard. "You'll need a place," he said after a while. She didn't answer. "I've got one," he said. "Not much, but no one will come asking." Her eyes flicked up at that, quick and sharp, then dropped again. Hale didn't press. He reached into his coat, took out a small parcel wrapped in brown paper, and set it beside her. "Bread. Took it from the morning's delivery. Eat before the heat spoils it." She touched the paper but didn't open it. The baby's breathing slowed. The auctioneer's voice drifted faintly from the yard, calling the next lot. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice and went quiet. Hale waited until the child slept, then said, "You can stay here till the wagon's clear. Then we'll ride." She looked at him then, as if to measure the truth in it. His face gave nothing away. The heat pressed down, and the dust began to settle again. By late afternoon, the yard thinned. Wagons creaked off toward the river road. Flies lost their argument with shade. He brought a bay gelding and a quiet roan mare from the tie rail and stood with the reins loose. She watched his hands first, not his eyes. When he offered a folded strip of linen, she understood. He helped her bind her ribs tighter so the ride wouldn't shake the pain loose. He looked away while she did it. The baby shifted and settled. He boosted her up to the roan with a grip that steadied but did not claim. He tied her crate-wrapped bread behind the saddle, set his canteen where she could reach, and mounted the bay. They left by the alley, not the main street. No one stopped them. No one wanted to look like they had seen. The road ran white and hard between thorn and low grass. Heat wavered above the flats. Dust trailed like a thin flag behind the horses. He kept the pace kind. When she swayed, he slowed. When the child fussed, he stopped. They made small camps of minutes, under a cottonwood, by a cattle guard, near a dry wash where someone once left a broken boot. He spoke little. "Drink," he said, and she did. Near dusk, the land lifted into ribs of low hills. His place showed slow, as if it were deciding whether to be seen. A square house, a lean-to barn, a windmill with one blade cracked and wired true, a yard beaten down by hooves that had learned its shape. A tin cup hung from a nail at the pump, pitted and clean. He swung down and came to her stirrup. The ground moved for her when her feet touched it. He caught her elbow and steadied the step to the porch. The house smelled of dust under pine soap. He opened the door with a shoulder and stood clear so light could find the floor ahead of her. Inside, a stove, a table with two chairs, a narrow bed built into an alcove, pegs with a coat and a second hat, a shelf with two plates, one cup, a tin of coffee, a jar with 3 nails and a button in it. He set his hat on the peg and crossed to the stove, laying kindling as if he had been thinking about this all day. She sat. The chair was rough at the edges. She stroked the baby's back in slow, absent circles. The child's breath came like a small saw cutting new wood. When the fire caught, the room changed from hollow to holding. He sliced bread, not the bakery loaf he'd bought for her, but a darker heel from his own tin. He put both on a plate. He set a pot on the stove and dropped in a handful of oats and a pinch of salt. When water talked, he added a scrap of dried apple and let it swell. The smell said home without promising more than the night. He brought a basin and a cloth and set them at her feet. She washed her face, then the bloodline on her calf. He left the room while she did, went to the yard and checked the gate he already knew to be closed, then came back with a small pail of pump water that had thought about winter and let it go. They ate leaning close to the table. She took small bites and watched the child between them. He ate like a man who had learned to make time stretch. When she slowed, he slid the plate closer by the width of a finger. She finished the apple pieces and left him the last spoon. He took it without thanks because thanks would have made it uneven. When the baby woke hungry again, he rose and turned his back to give them a room inside the room. He studied the windmill through the window until the child went quiet. Then he set a small lamp in the alcove and pulled a blanket from a cedar chest. He shook it once, and the smell of dry wood came up like a good memory. "You and the child take the bed," he said. "I'll be by the stove." Her mouth moved as if a word wanted out and couldn't find the shape. She nodded instead. He set his coat folded as a pillow by the hearth and laid a second blanket over it. He checked the latch and the back door bolt and the window pin so that the house learned their rhythm. The night took its first step across the yard. The baby woke twice. Each time she turned to the wall and made herself small around him. Each time the lamp's thin light made a halo of nothing around her hair. He lay with his boots off, one hand crossed over the other, listening to the stove tick and the windmill click and the sound of a child learning the work of living. Before dawn, he rose and walked the fence with a lantern, not because anyone was coming, but because a man rests better when he has matched his steps to his line. He came back with a rabbit caught in a snare and set it on the table without triumph. He skinned it with a clean knife at the porch rail while the sun found the far ridge. When the room brightened, she sat on the edge of the bed with her hair braided plain and the baby asleep inside her shawl. The shawl had seen better years. He looked for a word and found none that didn't bruise. He set coffee on and cleaned the rabbit with quick, respectful hands. "Do you have a name you'd put on the door?" he asked at last, eyes on the pot. She considered. "Maris," she said after a breath that seemed to weigh the cost. "His name is Gray." She did not offer more. He did not ask for it. He nodded once. "Hail," he said, because things should be equal at least that far. He took a carpenter's pencil from a cup, planed the end with his knife, and wrote Maris small on a scrap of board. He did not nail it up. He left it on the shelf where she could touch it or not. They spent the morning making the house fit three. He brought in a second chair from the porch and cut the legs down a finger width so it would sit without rocking. She folded her shawl in the chest and replaced it with the blanket he'd given her. He scrubbed the pot until the bottom showed clean tin again. She tied a torn hem with thread drawn from the inside of her skirt. He strung a line near the stove for cloth. She pinned nothing to it yet. At noon, he walked to the barn and came back with a cradle board someone else had left behind. The laces were worn smooth. He set it on the table and stepped away. She ran a palm along the edge and did not look up. Her thumb found a notch where a mother's nail had once caught. She steadied herself there and breathed in pieces until breath came all the way. After, he carried in a small box. Pins, needle, a spool of coarse thread, a short length of blue ribbon. He set the ribbon on the board and turned his hand over so it lay free on the wood. The color caught in the lamp's weak daylight. Maris watched it and then the child. She left the ribbon where it was. He nodded as if that answer had been one he'd hoped for. Toward evening, wind cut from the west and brought a smell of wet iron. He checked the hinge at the gate and found a shoe print he didn't like, a half-moon chip in the heel, deep enough to catch your eye later. He wiped it with his boot until the yard looked like any yard. In the barn, he pulled a plank and set a bar so the door would learn to hold. Back in the house, he set plates on the table, two, then a third without thinking about it. He moved the rabbit stew to the cooler side of the stove so it would wait without losing heart. Maris stood at the window with Gray asleep in her arms and watched the sky lower itself toward rain. She pressed her cheek to the child's hair and closed her eyes for a beat longer than rest. "Men from the yard may ask," he said, not turning. "They'll be told to try another gate." She touched the scrap with her name on it. Her finger left a small shine in the pencil graphite. "Why did you buy me?" she asked, the words flat, as if she were reciting a rule that had held too long. He set the ladle down so it wouldn't clatter. "To stop a thing," he said. "What thing?" "The next thing," he said, and left it there. Night came as if someone were pulling a blanket over the hills. He lit the lamp and set it low. The three of them ate with the quiet that hunger teaches. After, he washed the plates and left them tilted to dry. She took the baby to the bed and settled with her back to the wall again. Less tight this time. He sat in the second chair and waited for the house to learn them. Sometime past midnight, a horse blew close, and a spur rang once against stone. Hale rose without scuffing a board. He set his hand on the door and felt the weight on the other side of it. Two men, maybe, one with the half-moon chip. He lifted the bar on the barn door in his mind and heard it in his arm. He didn't open. He stepped to the window and let the wind carry his voice. "Ride the far wash," he said. Boot leather creaked. The horse turned. The spur didn't ring again. After a while, even the wind forgot them. He went back to the chair and did not sit. He stood under the shelf where her name lay on wood and let the room hold him. The baby made a soft, broken sound and fell into sleep deeper than pain. Maris's hand lay open on the blanket like a surrender to no one. He trimmed the lamp and stayed between the door and the bed until the thin hours slid through, and the house and the new thing inside it were still. The rain came before dawn, slow at first, then thick enough to drum against the porch roof and soak the yard into dark mud. Hale was already outside when it began, moving feed sacks under cover and checking the barn door he'd barred the night before. The half-moon print was gone, swallowed by the wet, but the thought of it stayed with him. Inside, Maris woke to the sound of water running from the roof into the barrel at the corner. The baby stirred in her arms and whimpered once, then settled again when she shifted her shawl. The room smelled of rain and wood smoke. Hale came in, leaving his hat and coat on the peg, drops falling from the brim. "Road'll wash in places," he said, more to himself than to her. She nodded but didn't speak. The baby began to fuss, and she turned toward the wall, making the space smaller for him to feed. Hale moved quietly around the stove, setting the coffee to boil and cutting what was left of the bread. He kept his eyes on his hands, letting the morning find its own pace. When she was done, he set a plate near her. She hesitated, then reached for it. He poured coffee into the tin cup and left it at the edge of the table. Her fingers wrapped around it slowly, holding it close for the heat. They ate without words. The rain made its own sound, steady and sure. After breakfast, he brought in a stack of firewood from the lean-to, setting it by the stove. "Best keep the heat even," he said. She shifted Gray to the cradle board and wrapped him in the blanket. His small breaths rose and fell in the quiet. Hale took a length of rope from a nail and began fixing the latch on the window nearest the bed. The wood had swelled in the damp, and he worked it until the fit was tight again. Maris watched him for a while, her hand resting on the baby's back, before turning her eyes to the rain beyond the glass. By midday, the sky had settled into a heavy gray. Hale took an oilskin from the peg and pulled it over his shoulders. "Need to check the north fence," he said. She didn't ask why, but he caught the flicker in her eyes as he stepped out. The ground was soft under his boots, the smell of wet earth rising with every step. He walked the fence line until he reached the far post, where the land dipped toward the wash. The wire was still tight, the post solid, but near the edge of the property, he found it again, the half-moon chip in the mud, fresh despite the rain. He stood over it, listening to the quiet. Whoever had been here wasn't far, and wasn't done. By the time he returned, his coat was heavy with water. Maris was by the stove, the baby in her arms. She looked up, searching his face for something he didn't say. "Fence is holding," he told her. She only nodded. He hung the coat to drip near the door and knelt by the fire to stir the embers. The baby made a soft sound, and Hale glanced over. "He's strong," he said. It was the first time he'd spoken of the child directly. Maris's eyes softened for just a moment. "He tries," she said quietly. The afternoon passed with small work. Hale mended a saddle strap, while Maris sewed a tear in her skirt. Gray slept in the cradleboard, the ribbon still tied at one end. The rain eased toward evening, leaving the air cool and damp. As night came, Hale checked the doors and windows again. The habit was part of him, but tonight it was sharper. He moved his bedroll closer to the door. Maris noticed but said nothing. In the deep hours, a sound came. Not a horse this time, but the slow press of a boot in wet ground. Hale's eyes opened in the dark. He rose without a word and took the shotgun from beside the door. Maris sat up, clutching the baby. Her breath was quiet but quick. Hale moved to the window and listened. The sound came again, closer. "Stay inside," he said, and slipped out the back. The yard was black, but for the thin light spilling from the window. He kept to the shadows, circling wide. At the far edge of the barn, a figure bent near the fence. Hale stepped up behind him, the shotgun low but ready. "Fence holds," Hale said. The man froze, then straightened slowly. His hat dripped rain, and in the lamplight from the house, Hale saw the half-moon chip in his boot heel. "Just looking," the man said. "You looked enough," Hale told him. The man's eyes shifted toward the house. Hale stepped closer, the weight of his voice leaving no ground between them. "Next time you leave tracks, I'll follow them back." The man nodded once, too quick, and stepped away. Hale didn't lower the shotgun until the dark had taken him completely. When he returned, Maris was still sitting on the bed, the baby held close. She didn't ask what happened. He set the shotgun back by the door and sat in the chair, watching the fire burn low. The night held its quiet after that, but neither of them slept until the gray light came again. The morning after the rain broke clear and spare. Puddles held small skies. Hale walked the yard with steam lifting from his coat and checked the prints that last night had laid down. The mud kept its secrets now. Wind had brushed it smooth. He oiled the hinges anyway and set new wire where the north run sagged a finger. Inside, Maris fed Gray and tied her hair back with the ribbon he had left. The shade of it surprised the room. She stood a little longer, steadier on her feet, and asked for a needle. He found one in a tin and set it in her palm as if it were glass. She mended the edge of the blanket with small, careful bites of thread. "Town," he said. "Back by noon." She glanced at the door, at the cradleboard, then at him. "We'll manage." He saddled the bay and rode out by the wash, following the hard ground. The sun had teeth. At the mercantile, men stood in their coats and let lies dry in their mouths. Hale bought flour, coffee, lamp oil, a twist of pins, and left a coin for the baker to send milk when he could. At the far end of the street, the sheriff leaned under his porch post like a man saving his boots for worse days. "Had a visitor," Hale said. The sheriff's eyes went to the chip in Hale's words and found it. "Rider with a bad heel," he said. "Name of Cobb. Works the edges. Sells what he didn't buy." "He's been buying women," Hale said. The sheriff's jaw set. "Some men call that law. I don't. I'll ride long your way." Hale tipped his hat and turned home. The windmill showed before the roof did. Smoke lifted thin and honest from the pipe. Maris had opened the window a hand's width and let the day in until it was gentle. She had washed the table and set Gray's cradleboard where the light could touch his face without scolding it. When Hale stepped inside, the air smelled of soap and a little stew. "Milk came," she said, almost proud of the sentence. He nodded, put the sack on the chair, and set the oil on the shelf. She took the pins without looking at him and hid them like treasure. They ate in the shade part of noon. Gray worked at the milk and then slept with his mouth open like a small question answered. Hale carved a notch into a cedar slat and wrote 2 words with the pencil that had learned her name: "Keep out." He set the slat on the gate where a rider's eyes would pass across it, slow. Afternoon brought heat enough to make flies bold. Hale fixed the pump handle. Maris swept the floor and shook the blanket at the door. She stood a long time looking at the yard, then stepped onto the porch and sat on the top step. The ribbon in her hair made a promise to no one. She breathed like a person who was beginning to expect the next breath to come. They heard them before they saw them. 3 horses at a walk, one with a rhythm that stumbled on the left. Maris rose without hurry and went inside. Hale took down the sign from the gate, not to hide it, but to hold it in his hand. They reined up where the yard loses its nerve and becomes land again. Cobb was at the center, hat tilted, heel wearing its broken moon. 2 men flanked him, thin and certain. They took in the house, the windmill, the bar on the barn door, the board over the window that used to gap and now did not. Cobb spoke like a man practicing courtesy until it turned. "You bought a lot that wasn't on the paper," he said. "We came for the part you can spare." Hale's hands were empty. "Ride on." Cobb smiled with one side of his mouth. "She was property when I saw her last. Property follows the bill." "She isn't property here." "Here," Cobb said soft, "isn't the world." Hale set the cedar slat against the post and let it show. Cobb read the rough letters, then read Hale's face. He touched his reins. The left-hand rider peeled off and looked toward the window. Maris had drawn the curtain half, leaving light. Gray made that small saw sound and went quiet again. Cobb heard it. His eyes sharpened. "A child," he said. "That makes it 2 lots." Hale stepped off the porch and closed the yard between them to the distance a word carries. "No lots," he said. The right-hand rider shifted, showed a dark hole in a holster, and let the air know. Hale didn't look at the gun. He leaned on the post, as if the house itself could be a thing a man chose to stand beside. "You'll make it a crowd if you press," Hale said. "Crowds don't ride home whole." Cobb watched him a long, unkind minute. The windmill clicked once. A hawk rode a short line over the wash. Hale kept his eyes on Cobb and not on the window. He could feel Maris not moving. He could feel Gray the way a man feels water near a dry creek. The sheriff's coat showed at the ridge like a cloud that meant rain later. Cobb saw it when Hale didn't. He flicked a glance and then hid it. "We'll file," Cobb said, pretending law. "We'll buy the words that say she's ours." "Words won't fit this door," Hale said. Cobb turned his horse. Mud lifted from the heel that had marked Hale's fence. "You can't keep every kind of weather out," he said, same as men always say when they are too small for honest work. "Just enough," Hale said. They rode. Dust lifted, then lay down and pretended it had never stood. Hale stood a long time with the slat in his hand. Then he drove 2 nails through it and fixed it to the gate so the letters would not wander when wind had ideas. He walked the yard twice. He walked the room with his eyes and counted the places where a child could hide if a door didn't hold. Maris put a hand on the table to stop it from shaking and failed once, then stopped it the second time. "That was him," she said. "Yes." Gray stirred and worked at his fist. Hale took the kettle off the hook before it boiled itself into a complaint. Evening thinned the heat. He set a lantern in the window and opened the flue to draw the smoke right. Maris sat and sewed the ribbon to the end of the cradle laces so it wouldn't get lost. Her stitches were small again. Her fingers knew the lesson and carried it forward. "You don't owe me anything," Hale said finally, without looking away from the flame. "If you want to take the socked road east when you're ready, I'll ride you far enough that you have a choice that doesn't begin in someone else's mouth." Maris's needle paused. "I owe Gray the kind of roof that remembers us," she said. "After that, we'll know." He let that be enough. They slept badly and woke early. Hale saddled the bay and left a note on the table. Courthouse. He rode to town with a pace that could be read and not mistaken. The sheriff was already there, hat off, eyes on a blank page. "Cobb aims to make paper," Hale said. "So do we," the sheriff answered. He pulled a form that had not felt a hand until this hour. "Statement of safety, house and persons. Judge will sign if the room believes it." Hale laid coin where coin mattered. The clerk wrote like a man who wanted to get it right before the morning boiled. The judge came in with sleep still on his face and wiped it away with a hand. He read, looked at Hale, and signed where the line asked. "It won't stop all fools," he said, "but it gives their friends a place to turn around." Hale rode home with the paper warm under his coat. At the house, Maris had boiled bones into broth and made it count. Gray was awake, eyes dark and curious, a little sure where tide had started coming in regular. She took the paper and didn't open it. She pressed it to the board where her name lay in pencil, and then put it under the cedar chest like a floor stone. A wind from the north shouldered the day. Hale walked the fence again. At the far post he found no prints, only the mark of a heel that had learned not to brag. He stood there until the sun moved a degree, and then went back. They ate early and let the stove fall to embers. Hale cleaned the rifle and the shotgun in turn, and left them both where he could reach them, without telling the room they mattered more than they did. Maris bathed Gray with a rag warmed in the last of the broth steam. The baby quieted like a struck bell finding its end. Night came cold for late season. Two owls spoke across the wash and taught each other patience. Hale sat at the table with his feet on the lower rung and watched the door breathe. Maris lay with Gray in the crook of her arm and watched the ceiling for leaks and found none. The paper under the chest made no sound but held. Near midnight, hooves broke the quiet, slow and many. Hale stood and the house stood with him. He reached for the lamp, turned the wick low, and let the room be mostly shadow with one square of window to say someone was here who would not run. Cobb stopped at the gate, 5 behind him. No sheriff this time, just the kind of men who count wrong on purpose. The half-moon boot rested on the rail like it owned wood. He looked at the slat, read the words again, and then raised his voice enough to insult the night. "Debt's due," he said. "Bring her and the child." Hale opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The air tasted of iron and dust. He kept his hands easy. "No debt lives here," he said. Cobb set his hand to his gun and then didn't draw. The men behind him bred courage from that small motion and let it out on their breaths. One moved left, slow, angling for the barn where he thought cover grew. Hale didn't grant him the idea. "Fence line's mine," he said. "Cross it and the judge owns your name by morning." Laughter broke wrong and died quick. Cobb's eyes flicked. He hadn't known about paper. Hale let silence show the rest. "Last chance," Cobb said. Hale lifted his chin toward the ridge. "Listen." They did, and the night told them the sheriff had learned to ride without dust. Cobb swore soft, a prayer to a god he had made. He wheeled his horse. "You won't always have friends," he called back. Hale didn't answer. He watched them leave until their sound was less than the owls. Then he turned and stepped inside and set the bar. Maris had not moved. Gray slept. The stove sighed. Hale set the rifle down, finally, and sat. "Soon," he said. "Soon," she echoed, and neither of them meant leaving. Morning came with a thin frost on the grass, silvering the yard like it was waiting for some first step to disturb it. Hale was already outside, moving slow, scanning the fence line for signs that the night had tried anything it didn't dare finish. Nothing. The slat still held. The prints were from yesterday, softening under the cold. Inside, Maris was at the stove, feeding the fire in small pieces so it wouldn't roar and wake the baby. Gray lay in the cradle board beside her, his tiny hands working at the air, eyes shifting under closed lids. She watched the way his fingers curled and uncurled, like the first knots of a rope learning what it was meant for. Hale stepped in and set his gloves on the table. He didn't speak right away. The quiet was steady now. Not empty, not tense. just steady. Maris poured him coffee, her hand careful not to spill. The steam curled between them. Cold won't last, he said. She nodded, eyes on the cup in his hands. After breakfast, Hale pulled the wagon from the shed and checked the wheels. Need to go to town, he told her. This time you come. Her eyes flickered to gray, to the thought of streets and strangers, but she said nothing. She wrapped him in the blanket she'd mended and tied the ribbon to the cradle straps. Hale helped her up onto the seat, then set the baby beside her, close to her side. The road to town was hard and bright under the frost, wheels clinking on stones. They passed the wash, dry again, in the windmill on the far ridge. Maris kept her eyes forward, only glancing once when a hawk crossed overhead, slow and high. In town, the street smelled of horses and bread from the baker's door. Hale tied the team outside the courthouse. The sheriff met them on the steps. "Judge is waiting," he said. Inside, the air was warmer than it needed to be. The judge sat with the paper Hale had filed, the one Maris had tucked under the cedar chest. "You're here to make it whole," he said. Hale nodded. "Name needs to match the roof." The judge looked to Maris. "Do you want that?" She glanced at Hale, then at Gray. "Yes," she said, quiet but with no room for doubt. The judge signed a second paper, this one heavier than the first. "Then it's done. No one can claim you or the boy without breaking the law to do it." Hale folded the paper and handed it to her. She held it like she'd held Gray the first night, unsure if it could stay, but wanting it to. They left the courthouse to a street that seemed smaller than before. Cobb wasn't there. Neither were his men. The sheriff's eyes scanned the far end anyway. Hale helped her into the wagon, and they started home. Halfway there, Maris spoke. "Why?" He looked at her, but she was watching the road. "You could have left me in town that first day." Hale's hands tightened on the reins. "You needed a place." Her voice was softer now. "And you?" He almost smiled, but didn't. "I needed someone to keep the stove from going cold." They reached the house before noon. Hale set the team in the shed and checked the fence again. Maris carried Gray inside, laying him in the spot where the light touched without glare. She pinned the paper to the wall above the table, next to the cedar slat that said, "Keep out." The day moved quiet. Hale fixed the back hinge on the barn door. Maris washed Gray's clothes in the tin basin, steam rising in the cool air. Every so often she glanced toward the gate, not out of fear but out of habit. By evening the frost had melted, leaving the ground dark and soft. Hale sat on the porch steps, cleaning his boots. Maris joined him, Gray asleep in her arms. They watched the sky turn the color of old iron. "You'll stay?" he asked, not looking at her. She adjusted the blanket over Gray. "I think we already did." He let that answer settle. When night came, the owls called again across the wash. The fire in the stove burned low, but steady. Hale set the bar across the door, not as a shield, but as a promise. And in that house, in the quiet beyond the reach of men like Cobb, a woman who'd been sold and a man who'd never meant to buy began something neither had planned, but both would keep. If this story stayed with you, like it, share it, and tell in the comments what part caught your heart or what you'd like to hear next.